Thanks everyone for joining me. As Deirdre said, my name is Jenna Walker and I'm honored to be here as a candidate for the leadership position for the Interior Architecture program. Before starting, I'm going to share just a brief overview of the agenda for the day. So I'll give you a quick introduction, a little bit about my background, and share some of the experiences and education that I've had. And then we'll move into a review of the hands-on workshop that I want to have you guys take part in with us today. And then we'll have breakout sessions where you will be numbering off and having teams where you're going to dig into a couple questions that I'm going to pose for you. And after that, we'll come back together and we'll start to kind of dive into that, what we hear and learn from each of your groups on the question of what, who, and why, which you'll see a little bit more detail of momentarily. And then we'll wrap up by discussing why I had you do this in the first place and what were my motivations and thoughts. And I'd like to hear kind of what you think of why I would choose to work in this way. And then I'll leave the floor open to either questions from the students or also from the faculty and staff as well. So shall we begin with just a brief overview? I have been working in the interior and architectural design community since 2002. I am what you would probably consider an insatiably curious person. I love learning and would be in your shoes still if I could be. I think education is an honor and a gift that we should continually strive for throughout our lives. And I've continued to do this through both formal studio experience and certifications and practice. So I have a bachelor's in interiors. I spent a summer abroad studying art and architectural history, and then have a master's in urban planning and historic preservation with an emphasis in community revitalization. So from this, I have worked on projects. Most notably, I've worked for a number of years, almost my entire career, on the District Detroit, downtown in Detroit, where the Illich family is developing the arena and the subsequent neighborhoods around it. I have worked for interiors-only firms and architectural firms, and currently work for Knoll, which is a major furniture and design brand that you are most likely, and if you're not, I'm questioning what you're learning here. Len, you're only teaching them about Steelcase? But also, you know, I'm a person. I'm a parent, I'm a partner, and I am really passionate about this field, so I'm really happy and excited to be here with you guys today. So, here's what we're going to do for the next roughly 45 minutes or so. Interior architecture. I want to break up into 3 groups. We're going to have you guys number off, and we are going to go into 3 major questions surrounding this practice. First of all, what is interior architecture? What do we do? As an interior architect, interior architectural designer, either if you are one or if you work with them, if you will be working with them, depending on what your degree program is and where you're heading into the field. That's the first question. The second, who, as an interior architectural designer, will you work with? This is your decision on how you answer these questions. And lastly, why? Why do we design in general? So I'd like you guys to start here and just number off in 3s, and we're going to break up into groups. I'm going to give you each a set of Post-it notes, and I want 1 concept per, and I want you to work with your teams. I don't want duplicated answers. Come together as a group and kind of start to come up with as many ideas as you can in the time. We'll probably spend about 10 minutes in your groups digging into each of these, and then we'll come back and we'll start to dig into how your team chose to answer these questions. And everybody good? Any questions? All right, go ahead and start numbering.
2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Are we supposed to?
No, you're fine.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll just, you guys can kind of 1, 2, 3 here.
1, 2, 3, all right? So group 1 is there, group 2 is here, group 3 is there.
I'll do it there.
Here's a couple Post-its.
We are going to be.
If you guys want to join, go ahead. You guys will have some things to say during the commentary, I think.
We'll meander.
Perfect. There's some Post-its. And then here are some Post-it notes for you guys. So, take these.
The one where we were in there, huge house.
Yeah, they can have a sheet to kind of start to place those on. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, you can pull it off. If you think we can erase this, yeah, they can write it, and they can do it right on the board if you think it's a... Okay, perfect. So you're only answering one question. Sorry. You guys are answering what is design. You guys are answering only who do you work with. Sorry, I didn't clarify that. And I want your team to only answer why. Okay? Start over. So you guys only answer why. So you guys have who, and you guys have what is interior architecture. Okay? Yep. Tons of different, just as many ideas, but each singular idea on a Post-it note, and we will start to break that down. Okay. And then you said you do have a remote, so as I'm kind of working over. Okay.
Good. So, okay, figured I didn't. I sent it out to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
We were talking. Yes. You can do all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for like all-night flights, you could send it and then like have them send about the time you plan so that your phone doesn't just blow up.
You can break these down too.
It just happened to me, like I'll
Further.
send a bunch of emails.
You don't have to, but you can. If it would help you,
And then if it's a
what type of
7 or 8
clients do you
hour
work with?
flight,
What type of
time
engineers?
change, everybody's answering you and you just want to go back.
Yeah.
Is that just,
That just goes into.
is that a USB?
Before you get on. Yeah, so by the time everybody wakes
Like it's
up,
missing something. Does
if you're
that?
jet lagged, everybody's smiling.
Yeah. I think with
There you go.
Left or right? Advance the slide. That way you can walk around.
Perfect.
I figured you were talking about. Exactly.
Right.
Then I thank her for letting us know
that one quote. I think Scott texted me the quote. I was like, yeah, you guys better than that. When that happened, I was just thanks for recommendation. When I was said, it was like a collective, like, you felt it go through the room, especially.
I was like 5 people didn't turn around.
Oh no,
I did.
You
I
just
did.
did it.
You just did it. Cool.
Because I did the same thing. I was like, look at how big your eyes.
I was, you know me, I'm so lying. I was like, where's Jim Sims?
Well, think about your project then. Maybe break it down and really think about activities and actions. And, you know, for example, you know what else you do? You write a lot of emails. You know, in thinking in that minute detail. You research, you read, you draw, you know, like I mean, it doesn't have to be the way you answer it, but you know, and you can think big picture, but I would encourage you to just think from all facets, because there may be things that you will do that you may not understand you're going to do yet as a student, that once you're out in the field, you're like, wow, I didn't realize this would be such a big part of my job. You know, sales, you're selling your ideas. You can think it's a dirty word, but you're going to have to be selling. You got to sell your ideas, because if you can't, then your client's going to pick the other firm. You know, so just.
What was going on? And then you were like, thanks,
Those are doing
but
good.
you never know.
I want 5 students. Yeah. And then we'll wrap up here.
People keep it as an
So they're building out like design thinking workshops, but what they so that we're going to do that with a high school group. I was like, yeah, these are college students. So they're like, all right, well, we'd like to go through kind of all our resources up front, database that we have for us to and that come back and talk about it. It's like 2 hours.
They know what they want.
It's a good way to go.
I don't know if that would be. Maybe we should just write down lawyers in general.
Yeah, lawyers.
For contact.
I feel like you check in with like the city a lot. Does
Code officials.
I mean, they're happy to
Variety of municipal, really working with a lot of those.
Frank, come here from back.
I'm going to check on my crew down there. I'll be right back.
Got 3 minutes about, so.
going through like
Am I working through like office?
You're spot on. More than ever, HR is influencing workspace design especially. So they will be your number one client in a lot of organizations because they've been the one tasked for recruiting and retaining client or retaining employees, and now the workplace is being used as a tool for that. So that's absolutely right. It's a good one. It's good. you're working, so you know a lot more of this because you're realizing there's way more than you probably ever intended to be working with.
Stop putting me on the spot.
Not to put you on the spot, but you're on the spot.
You guys feeling good? You want to present first? Okay. We'll wrap everybody up. Start, you can use this area here and start to kind of get your ideas out, and then we'll have you start to talk about what you found, and then we'll engage with the faculty and myself, and we'll do some sorting.
Yeah, that's what I wanted.
So as you guys wrap up, you can use that sticky page right over there and start to put your ideas up there, and then they're going to present first, and then you guys can present second, and kind of your findings, and we'll do some interaction.
All right.
All right. If you guys want to start to they're going to present, we're going to just present in order. So we'll start with one. If you guys want to come over so we can all kind of dig into theirs, and then we'll work our way this way. No, you don't need to. That's for their own, yeah, that's for their own thoughts and organization.
Yes.
And then Andre's over there trying to line them all.
You don't need to be able to read them, so you can sit kind of wherever.
I think he's so too. He's using the phone to measure it out.
Come on.
What are you doing over there?
Good man, Andres. Good man. Thank you, Chris.
It's like every hair in his head has got to be affected. The train 7,000.
I've been trying
How do you? So I don't want anything close to everything. So they got this. So I'm being very careful. I just want to make sure. Seconds.
Let's do your seat. All right. So, can you guys walk us through, so the question this team had to answer was, what is interior architecture? So I'd love for you guys to just kind of dig into your thoughts on what do we do as interior architectural designers. You can read them, you can discuss it, and talk about it. And then we're going to have some questions and conversation around it.
All right, I'll just read each sticky note and then turn it into a conversation back and forth. So my group and I, what is interior architecture? We said block diagram, a feeling of a space, understanding circulation and movement, an experience, challenging ourselves, understanding clients at a personal level, how to revolutionize the workplace, sales and marketing, picking materials, educate others and ourselves, inspire others, field trips, work with great companies, example, Steelcase, Knoll, Hayworth, Herman Miller, collaborate with peers, president studies, adjacency matrix, research, emails and letters, picking furniture, organized and precise, exhibit A, separation of spaces, experiment with ideas, color scheme, and numerous sketches.
Is there anything else anyone feels is missing before we start to talk about how we could categorize these and break them down a little bit? Any other activities, ideas? So I think you guys have a great start on this. You've got a lot of different ideas. So if you started to categorize them and think about them and sort them in different ways, is there anywhere that you can already start to see some patterns developing with the types of activities?
Yeah, I'd probably say so. I mean, one group can be client itself and what goes on when it comes to talking to a client. Another category could be more of the experience, kind of walking through what's going on in a personal scheme or project. And then another thing would be, I guess, an organization or company, what each company has to offer in terms of color, in terms of material, in terms of furniture.
So another way to say that, I would say, would be there's a business side of design and there's a design side of design. And I think you guys did a good job capturing some of that. You know, it's not all creative design. You know, sales can be a dirty word, but you're selling your design, you're selling your ideas. If your client is not buying into it, then the project is not happening and they're going to the next firm down the street. So I think talking about that, realizing you're going to be doing a lot more emails than you ever want to do is great. So great, thank you. We're going to move on to the next team here. We're going to talk about who do we work with? When you're an interior architectural designer, who do we work with? Somebody, it's up to you if you need to read them or if you can speak. This is casual.
Okay, so for who does an interior architect work with, we said clients and we broke it down into commercial, residential, so that could be individuals, and then commercial could be large scale, small scale, leasing or landlord reps, contractors, historic preservationists, media firms, skilled trade specialists, we said, for example, carpenter, plumber, electrician, painter, etc., graphic designers, urban planners, code officials, state and local, HR, reps, so furniture, flooring, tile, stone, paint, etc., civil engineers, mechanical, electrical, architectural, environmental, structural, and then, of course, architects, both individuals and firms.
I think you guys did a good job breaking out kind of overarching themes of who the clients could be. I think, and you started, when you kind of started that conversation about human resources, who those clients are, because they're not, the client isn't always an organization. It's made up of people, and who are all of those people? So yes, you have this large contingent of fellow consultants and professionals that you'll work with, but also from a client standpoint, you will have an endless number of types of personalities and positions that all have a different idea of what is in it for them in this project. So great. Let's go to the last group.
Okay, so we had why do we design as interior architects? So we want to create a user experience, bringing ideas of clients to reality, promoting well-being of occupants, to better utilize materials and resources to maintain the planet, to collaborate between disciplines in the design world, creating spaces for the current time, solving problems, and manipulating human behavior and emotion.
Anybody else have any other thoughts on that? Faculty or staff or students? Why you personally chose to be a designer? I think it's good. It's a comprehensive list with a lot of diversity. So they seem kind of abstract, right? So why did I ask you guys this? Why do you think I asked you to go through this specifically about interior architecture in general? I have a couple of motivations that I'll share, but I just want to see if any of you can glean why I would want to go through this. Yeah?
A lot of people believe that interior architects just pick out furniture and call it good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They think that architects can do interiors just as well as interiors majors.
Okay. That is possibly, that does happen in the industry sometimes. So taking that to the next level, though, you know, it's about respect. do you respect your fellow professionals? And who are we working with? And do you understand what they bring to the table too? And does this program promote that? I think you guys had a great list, and I'm happy to see that there is a wide-ranging idea of who the different types of people that you're going to be working with are. Because interiors is, to me at least, my own personal belief in, is all about the people and how humans interact in the built environment. So that is definitely one reason. The other, hold on, I'm going a little too fast here. The other thought that I had is, when you're programming for your client, are you thinking about these things for them? What do they do? Who do they work with? How, who do they work for? Why do they do the work they do? Are you just looking at it from a programmatic, spatial analysis? Who needs to be where? Who do they need to be by? And also how they do things now. Are you challenging them and questioning, is that the right way they should be doing it? Or are there new ways to work or different ways to work that may actually be better for their organization? So you can take these same concepts that you're applying here to your own industry, but when you're out there with your clients, thinking deeply about their motivations. It's not, that's empathy and compassion. Why do they do what they do? They have a reason they went into this field. This field exists for a reason, this type of business, this type of organization. So trying to put yourself in their shoes and look from a broad perspective of what they do is fundamental for creating the right design solution for the people who will be occupying that space. And the last reason is simply selfish. I wanted to get a read on this program and see, with architecture students and, hearing you say people think designers are just pick finishes and furniture and architects can do their job. I selfishly, if I would like to become a part of this organization, I want to understand the respect for the department. So I think this was a good way for me to get a read from the students on where you see yourselves in the overall building, built environment industry. So that's it. Any questions? Nothing? Comments? It went a lot faster than I thought it would. Anybody out there? Staff or student? Or staff or faculty have?
Jenna, do you want to share any maybe biases you have run into as both? I mean, you've been on the design side, now you're on the manufacturing side. You possibly represented a client. So
yeah.
Share maybe some of the things you've run across.
I think for me, I was very fortunate when I first stepped into this industry to work directly for an end user in an architecture team that was very lean, and immediately I was just one of the team members. Everybody dabbled in a little bit of everything. There were no hard lines. There were no boundaries. We all were design professionals and worked well together and leaned on each other for our individual unique perspectives and strengths, no matter what that formal role would be. And that set me up for maybe a little bit of a false sense of security around the industry. Upon leaving that, and especially during the recession, interiors, there was a lot of legislative fights between AIA and the interiors on regulating the profession and who could do what. And I think that was out of a place of fear and scarcity when jobs were low. And I've seen it from that, but day in and day out in the field, I've primarily run into most professionals really understand and respect where one another come from and what unique skill set they bring to the table. I do have colleagues that haven't experienced that. I think it really depends on the culture of the firm you're at and where you're at. I think clients sometimes misunderstand. From a furniture manufacturer standpoint, my role is unique. I'm research and strategy, so I'm not necessarily selling the product. I'm not a commission sales team, but I work with and support a commission sales team. So from their standpoint, they're just, people just jump right into product. Like, what do I need? What do I need? Where we always try to get them to stop and think strategy and back up, how do you work? And I think that's what's missing in a lot of education, is asking those right questions. As the nature of life changes and technology advances and we continue to evolve as a race, a human race, are we asking the right questions still, or are we still operating in an antiquated design mentality and traditional system that no longer serves the purposes of how people work? So, you know, I'd love to hear from some of you. You know, what have you experienced? Have you had that bias? You had an interiors background. So have you had a similar, where it's been a respectful?
It's been hit or miss, depending on where I was at and who I was working with. In some regards, it was just the color pickers, furniture people, and that was the extent of our involvement. And then there were others where it was a much more collaborative effort from conceptual design going forward. So I think it depends on the culture of the place that you're at, their ideas of what their firm stands for. But now you need to realize this is going back a long number of years ago versus what I think might be happening today. So.
And I would say the questions why I wanted to raise this and think about it is because I think it starts here. You have a multidisciplinary program for a reason. We are all design professionals. Will all be working within the realm of design in some way. So having a mutual respect and ability to collaborate and work together now is going to inform how you go out to practice. And I wanted to get a feel for that and see where you're at. You know, is that something that internally you're still battling? Or has it, you know, and I've had a lot of conversations today with faculty already to start to see where this program is going, and I think it has a lot of really incredible potential moving forward with multidisciplinary design and the way the world is changing. And I think you are prone to have a leg up on some other programs that operate in silos and do not have that multidisciplinary approach and access to other professionals. You know, having an engineering school and along with all of the arts and design programs, I think is huge. The way you interact with the nursing program, and you're continually testing the way they do their job is incredible. And you've all made a great decision to come here and focus on that interior architecture component. I know there's conversations being had around that concept right now of should interior architecture be allowed to be called interior architecture. But I would argue that yes, because this isn't decoration. You are a subset specialty of architecture as a paradigm and as a much larger concept.
I'd argue no, just as a way that we can extend the conversation if it's going too quickly. But I don't think there's an alternative, right? We know it's not interior decoration. If interior design didn't already exist, I like the way that you're talking about design as a more inclusive thing. I think the problem more broadly,
PR problem.
It is, and it's like we have this problem in a number of ways, and maybe I'll even zoom out and say, I heard a statistic recently that in the 1800s, 40% of the US population was working in agriculture. At that point in time, no one could understand what search engine optimization would be a job at that point in time. So when you ask like, who do you work with, it's like 10 years from now, who you work with might be a radically different thing. There are people in school right now, like we don't know students that are in elementary school now what their jobs will be when they go to college or what degrees they'll be in. And I think interior architecture is difficult. I do like Beth's point, but what I like about what you're talking about, what you presented today, is that you guys could do something that's different. By calling it interior architecture, it defers to the fact that there is a large overlap between those things, and when there's an overlap and it's ill-defined, there's always going to be a discussion. I don't think that your guys' disciplines have done a great job. Len and I are always talking about this. Architects can legally do interiors. Interiors people cannot legally do architecture. That's on your guys' discipline that allowed that to occur, right? And so that's why there is this kind of friction that you start to see within it. But how do you deal with data? How do you think about empathy? What are the questions that you're asking about your client? What are you thinking about the finances for these things? Like, the more value, and I recently talked to some of you guys about digital fabrication. right? All of these things that you could start to do within your discipline that allows you to differentiate and start to pull out from that overlap between those two things gives you an opportunity to have more value and more say within that discussion. And I think at LTU, there's certainly been a history, like the program hasn't been big enough to warrant its own identity. So there's a lot of classes that are in the same way. It's, you take mostly architecture classes with a few other things. Well, how can you differentiate that degree when it's not big enough, so we can't have our own classes, so we're gonna have mostly architecture classes, but grow the program, grow the identity, and then start to change those things. So I totally agree with you in that we start that discussion for the next 10, 20 years here right now.
And that's the what do we do.
Right.
You know, these are all valid things that we do as designers, but there was no conversation about tracking metrics or computational design or workplace strategy. Workplace strategy is a huge part of what we do today as interiors people. We are not only looking at the physical workplace, but we're looking at the organizational structure, the activities and way that people are operating in that space, and then giving solutions to how the space is going to respond to that. And I think that is a path kind of where interiors is leading. If you're looking at the broader kind of scope planning, it's a proactive path.
As opposed
it's a
to
consultative.
delivering a service when you, like if you have a sense that delivering a good service is doing what your client asks you, you can only be as good as your client is. Whereas being proactive about that, you start telling your client where they should be heading, that they haven't considered anything yet, they'll pay you that much more if you have a good track record.
And there are firms that have got there, that are getting there and they're the ones that will be here in 10 years. And there are a lot of firms, and I work with, there are like 300 firms in my region right now, and there are a lot of firms that won't be here in the long term because they aren't going that next step and thinking in that different way. And technology is going to keep coming and it's going to keep changing, but I continually say we've got to go back to what makes us unique as humans. It's the emotions, it's the social, it's the mental, and you know, that human component that will keep us from being replaced by machines in the arbitrary sense. You know, there will be things within design that they will do through artificial intelligence and other technologies, but we still need people to respond to people, right? So, any thoughts?
So I think the people who recognize what you're saying and use that in their own work that will have the job. I mean, I think that's been written over and over again. It's kind of the creative side, the empathetic side of us. If your technological kind of understanding is leveraged through kind of those human things, that's what's going to keep you employed in your careers. And I think that's one of the reasons I think design's a great choice as a major right now, particularly at a technological university. But how that plays out and rolls out in a curriculum in an interior architecture program, I actually don't know yet. Like I think we have all of the pieces to the puzzle. We just have to kind of put it together, and that's what's exciting about what's happening for me particularly.
So for the students in the room that are interiors, you guys probably talk about a lot of this in class, but is this where you want to be? Is that what you thought design was when you came into this interior architecture? Is this what you knew you were going into, or did you have a different idea of what this program would be?
I guess for me personally, coming into just architecture, being a dual degree of interior architecture, in my past, I was told that interior architects are the ones that work at Arvane Furniture and just help you select pieces on the sales floor and whatnot. I guess after numerous projects under Chris and Len, it kind of changed the perspective that we are not only kind of hidden behind the doors, but we actually go on site, talk to these clients, understand their needs, their wants, and then at the end of the day, kind of give them a great example of what could happen.
Yeah, I totally agree. I guess like my thought choosing interior architecture over architecture was architects design a building as a whole, and a lot of people go and look at outsides of buildings. Even in history classes, you learn what the building looks like on the outside, and that's not what humans are interacting with. So like designing spaces for people to walk through and like creating universal design for people with special needs or people with disabilities and how they interact with spaces differently. And that's kind of what pushed me towards interiors rather than architecture.
We talked a lot about the different scale. Interiors definitely deals more and focuses in on human scale and the interactions people have within that design environment, since we are in a built environment so much of the time. So I like how you talk about empathy, because I think that plays a huge, huge part in it.
You know, we have design and architecture both have a bad rap. You know, there's a lot of architects that are driven by high ego. And we're in a world today where that ego is looked down upon. It's part of who we are, but I think to be able to set that aside and not design for yourself and be designing for the betterment of the world is where you're going to grow. And I think you're going to start to see some of that. You know, I've even seen it in my own practice where the architect in the office that was just dominating and domineering and very egotistical, and he's the only one that had the right decision. And in my particular case, not always he, but in my particular situation, it was a principal at the firm that no one wanted to work on a project together. And the client wasn't always happy because their decision was the only right decision. So having that, not only the empathy to put yourself in the shoes of the client, but the empathy to work together and recognize your colleagues as fellow humans that have valid opinions and experiences that they bring to the table is a huge part of education today. And you know, unfortunately, with the world we live in and the ability to hide behind a screen, we don't have that human connection that we used to have in generations past. So it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like the technology side, it's got its positives and it's got some negatives. So it's our role as designers to help mitigate some of those through space and the places where we come together for those connections.
I wonder how we might test some of those things. I'm thinking about, I love what all three of you guys said from the student perspective, and I was just at a conference this weekend and someone talked about if they were to rethink architectural education and it were 3 years, they would say year 1 would be 2D, year 2 would be 3D, year 4 would be 4D, right? And 4D being the behaviors of all of the things that get created. And that's what I hear you guys talking a little bit about. So it's not the wall that you draw, but it's how people might move through the space. So you started to talk maybe a little bit about big data, tracking movement. I know other firms that have built entire floors of a surgery center out of cardboard to test something and see how people would move through it. And so I think there's certainly, there are different methodologies maybe down the entire hallway. And I'd be curious how interiors starts to develop tools or techniques that play well with the other methodologies, but don't maybe replicate it. And so if you're working the same way, again, you're going to have that overlap and that kind of competition. But if you can come to it, you can say, well, that's true, you did design this, but here's how people are actually going to move through the space as a result of that. You bring a different voice and a different perspective to that conversation. So I just wonder how, if we think about where we're going to move forward with these things, how do we start to develop those types of tools or techniques in this studio to help differentiate?
I'm not sure I wouldn't argue that some of those tools and techniques already exist, right? Like, if we look at environmental psychology and we start looking, like the POE is the first and kind of easiest low-hanging fruit to do, but I forget what study it was that I was looking at, that it was the Tate Modern and like 4 or 5 museums, that between using the actual security camera system and then having people on track to see how they actually are moving through the museum, comes back directly to space planning, right? And then when we take those and start overlaying them and actually find that, 15% of people go directly to the back first and work their way forward, how does that start then informing a design? So I think maybe the skill sets, and not saying with new technology that doesn't exist to further expand those and develop new ones, but I think a lot of the skill sets are already there. It's just pulling them to the forefront in the design process.
Well, pulling them here.
Yeah.
It's having the training early to be able to take that out, and that's where I think there are definitely pioneers out there doing these things, but they're happening in small corners of the industry where they could be widely used to benefit many more people.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's where some of the fall off between what is interior design and interior architecture and interior decorating has, which is there are interior architects, interior designers who are doing that work, but it's just not widespread enough through the industry as it currently stands.
And I feel like a lot of them are switching over, and they're workplace strategists. That's kind of where that conversation is going. They're trained as interiors, but they're calling themselves workplace strategists.
Yeah.
That would be a discussion for changing the name of the degree.
But, you know,
Let's whoa,
yeah.
Thanks for coming today.
I'm glad you're voicing your...
Yeah, CIDQ just put out a survey about 2 weeks ago to all of those schools who call their program interior architecture. They asked a series of questions, including, does the term interior architecture attract more males to your program versus interior design, and all of the negative decorating connotations that go with that. So the results have not been published yet. I think they're going to do that next month. But it'd be very interesting to see what this survey says, because that's exactly what they are saying. What is the difference between interior design and interior architecture? How does it affect sort of your own personal view of what you are? How does the industry look at it, and all of that? So
there are definitely cultural constructs that I am, as a male, I cannot be, you know, this goes into a very long and lengthy discussion about gender and roles, but in our society, yeah, like guy is an architect, woman is a designer, and this generation is the one that's changing those roles, right? So we as older generations need to open our minds to that and think about diversity, inclusion, and we shouldn't have programs that have limited demographics. The more diversity we have, the better we can service the population of our planet, which is very diverse, right? So I think that's good to hear. They're at that level. They're starting to look into that. Because sometimes I feel accreditations are very important, and you need that accredited degree to go and work in the world we live in today. But all that red tape kind of limits you to where you go and what the program can do and how quickly it can evolve without losing the accreditation.
Since you brought up the topic of name change, which I think is great, what everybody has been saying has kind of led me to be thinking about, and I was quiet until the door opened. So the 20th century term might be environmental design.
You could say interaction design.
21st century title change would be experiential design. But environmental, you guys have all talked about the environment.
Which was in vogue 20, 30 years ago and then fell off, and yeah, and I think you're right, experiential design is really kind of already emerging as a concept, and it's designers from all different sects of design, you know, all different sects are coming and still part of this overarching experiential.
So what would CETA say about that?
We'll ask them.
Right.
I think the whole idea of environmental design, though, encapsulates the exterior, the globe, the earth, and all of that. So to me, we still be kind of lost as to who are we, what is our identity.
Right.
So I hesitate going that route. I do like the idea of experiential design.
I like experiential.
That's exactly what this is about. And I would challenge.
Is that moving back to our design?
No, I'm staying here for right now. I would challenge, as you said, this was on us because we allow architects to practice interior design. I'm going to put it back on architects to understand what interiors brings to the table, because I don't think there's that great of recognition where it could be better as to the human experience and what else would be.
That's why I think there's opportunities to discuss how we differentiate the degrees, so that there's less overlap between those. So you can.
But I still think a certain amount of overlap is necessary.
Super necessary.
Because that distinguishes us from the interior design schools who, as Jenna mentioned, are just standalone, that have no interdisciplinary action with engineering, architecture, or anything like that.
The interior will always exist within an architectural component.
And so
there is a relationship.
Yeah,
there has to be relationship.
There's also proximity, though, too. I mean, there are other interiors programs that are part of schools of fine arts, too, where there is not even an architecture degree offered at that university.
That's all of the programs in the state, besides you.
Yes. Right. So just by proximity on the same floor of a building where architecture exists and having to do some things, we're already in a better position than
We are.
others.
We're going to be challenged very shortly because Kendall's looking
Kendall
at
is looking at
bringing a school of architecture in and then marry the two together. So then we will be one of two.
So then, also to feedback on your statement, I think you're right. I think, but one thing I would say is students at earlier is an issue of scale. I mean, we have architecture, but we have interior architecture. We also have urban design, which is kind of taking it
An industrial design.
And industrial design, which you can zooms in closer. And my response to what you said, Len, would be that at least as being trained as an architect and working in architecture, I think one of the big jobs of at least a principal or a project architect is knowing what the strengths and the contribution of all the people that are on a design team bring to the table, respecting them from that and kind of coordinating that. And I think now more than ever, design professionals have to understand that as well, because the disciplines are becoming so overlapped. Even if we change names and put us on a different part of campus, it doesn't change that the profession is starting, all of the professors are starting to kind of blend together more, particularly with technology. So I think if you're an interior designer, if you're an engineer, if you're an architect, a graphic designer, I think just being a design professional, there needs to be a larger awareness of that altogether. And so the bigger question is how do you differentiate yourself while still remaining overlapped with someone else who's differentiated themselves? And it's a tricky thing, but I think it's actually really possible.
From a professional practice perspective, I think there's two big things that differentiate them: liability and how you're compensated.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right?
But I do think, and I guess coming from this program in particular, holding both of those degrees, the overlap between architecture and our interior architecture program that starts giving you a better understanding of environmental factors, HVAC, electrical, and some structural right off the bat, gives this program a standing that no other program in this state and very few in this country have, which is an educated student base who are able to then better interact with their counterparts in industry. So to cut off that overlap, or to even, it is about differentiating, and specifically what is the architect, what is this, what are all those other pieces as well, but that undertone and that overlap and the ability to share that same language, I think, is vital.
Exactly, and it's about like eliminating the middleman. Like we, as interior architects, in this program, we learn how to like note CDs and like talk in the language of contractors and like craftsmen, and being able to not have to go through an architect to do that.
It's not an accident that our interiors program is typically the first choice that we get calls from companies looking for either
It's always me.
interns or graduate students. And Jenna's hired them.
I'm hired. We call LTU first.
All the time.
Absolutely.
We call LTU first.
Because they're ready to, they can come out of school as an intern or graduate and be able, it's not just theory based. The practice side of it is very important, and historically students out of this program have been able to jump right in and actually create documents and work with clients, and other schools are not usually. I mean, there are individuals for sure, but there's a good track record here. Yeah, you get the calls, so you know.
We get the calls.
Yeah.
It's so nice, but I was gonna say that I think we, as a school, are like, I don't know if you know anything about our game art program, but they have a bunch of this utilization of different, like there are people in different programs that work together in that program, and I think that's something we aren't utilizing in this program right now. Like there are people learning like architectural engineering and other things in other programs in other colleges that I don't think we tap into as an interior architecture program. And I think that one of the things that we were talking about utilizing different different people and different, like the people that we work with, it would be so much more interesting to push that forward into actually bringing in like architectural engineers to work with us on a level where we don't get that until we go into the field. Because we do work with engineers all the time, but we don't get that until we leave school.
there's a few things I would say about that though. I'm critical of game art when I look upstairs at the work on the wall, and I'll be like, industrial design, architecture, interiors, they don't come and talk. They're designing interior environments every day.
I was thinking the same thing, like just because it's a virtual environment versus a physical environment, what's the difference?
Right.
And that can be something that's pushed forward within the college. And I think that sometimes we sectionalize ourselves as interior architecture and game design and don't work together as much as we could, even in a space where we're so close together.
But there's also a kind of worldview related to that too, is that one has to mature enough, right? If you mix everyone together at the beginning, how do you start to know what you bring to the table, right? And so there's a certain amount of like, understand things foundationally. What does my discipline do? How do I engage another discipline in a discussion? If you don't understand your core competencies, it's really difficult to add to the conversation if you don't know what it is that you do either. And so I think we're talking undergrad. I think there's opportunities that you start to mix in many different ways at a graduate level, right? Once you move from undergraduate, you understand that core to then do some other things too. But it is a balance. We have everyone here, and it's trying to like, have we built enough foundation yet? Okay, should we start to mix these things yet? How does that work?
And then to give you an example, you're in ID2, and this is a prime example where interior architecture students and architecture students are in the same studio at the same point in their career. And it's because that's a core competency studio that both disciplines share, almost identically in a way, in that particular studio. Now, when you move on up through studios is when it'll split, but that's an example.
On this, in fairness, comes back to a conversation that I had with Carl before too, which was, wouldn't it be nice if it was all just design? You know, like it's a degree of design. But
we have one class called design.
Right. But there is, it is in fairness as you start getting out to those different subsects and, you know, what is your speciality, you have to be able to differentiate that too, you know. So is it about having enough information to be dangerous? Is it about having enough information to dabble, you know?
But isn't it interesting to step back and look at, Thomas Jefferson? He was not an architect, but he was an architect. But he wasn't formally trained. Like, he was many different things.
Yeah.
And you look back through history and how many, his monuments we study still today were done by people who never drew those lines in the sand. So those diverse experiences actually informed that design. So you can go in so many different directions.
Well, and then like, what is the architect of a program versus a digital architect versus a physical architect versus an interior architect if we're going to actually just use the term architecture as a singular term?
I like the title of experiential design because I feel like most of our memories and our experiences exist inside the space of four walls, and a designer has the power to define that space.
I didn't pay it.
He's like, but I'll slip you a 20 in the hallway.
Yeah. You're getting free dinner tonight. Oh. Great. Thank you. That is exactly the type of information that I wanted to glean today. I wanted to see where you all stood on this and have these conversations and understand this program in particular in this ever-changing landscape that's out there. So, thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you.
ability.